I don't remember much about my elementary school days, but this memory really stands out and has always stuck with me through the years. I was around 9 years old, and it was the late 80s in Portland, Oregon. Because both of my parents worked full-time, I had to go to a daycare before and after school every day. I was always dropped off pretty early in the morning, usually before 6 a.m., so my parents could get to work on time and deal with traffic getting downtown. Sometimes I'd be the first kid there, but occasionally there would be 1 or 2 other kids when I showed up. This morning, there was only 1 other kid and the 2 daycare providers that opened and worked in the morning. The building was in a suburban part of Portland and was a large 2-story house that had been converted into a daycare. It was also on a very large lot for that area, I'm guessing close to an acre, which was nice because the entire back part of the lot had 2 separate playgrounds, swing sets, beautiful old pine trees, and a large yard to run around on. I would also regularly have breakfast there shortly after I was dropped off, which I always liked. I remember the other kid and I were both waiting for breakfast and sitting on a couch that was against a big picture window that faced the play area behind the daycare. I don't remember what time it was exactly, but it was just before the sun came up. There was a light blue in the sky, but it was still pretty dark outside. The kid next to me was the first one to notice something outside and brought it to my attention. We both turned around, now kneeling on the couch, leaning against the back of it and looking out the window to get a better view of what was one of the weirdest things I have ever seen. Just above the large pine trees in the back was this object slowly floating over the property. This sounds ridiculous, but it looked like a giant chunk of raw, rough gold to me. It was more or less the shape of a cube, but didn't have any sharp corners or edges. It had the texture of a rock though, and looked very uneven and rough on the outside. My best description is that it looked like a piece of dirty gold that was just found or pulled out of the ground. We immediately started talking about it and telling the 2 women that worked there. One of them came to the window, and I remember her being just as shocked and curious as we were. She called the other woman over to the window, but she opened the back door to get a better look instead. I remember both of them walking back and forth between the window and outside the back door several times. The 4 of us watched as it slowly floated over, so close to the treetops that I thought it was going to hit them. At one point, one of the older women made a phone call, but I didn't pay much attention to it and I just kept watching. The 2 adults were definitely freaking out a bit, and there was an overall feeling of anxiety in all of us. We watched it until it was completely over the building, out of sight, and over a small hill that the daycare was on. With the back door still open, I heard them saying there was no sound at all and that neither of them had any idea what it was. After that, more parents and kids started showing up like normal, and the day just went on as it always did. I heard the story being retold throughout the day between daycare employees, but never really got any answers. I told my dad what had happened, who also talked to one of the daycare employees, but again, no one knew what on earth it was. My dad had always been into hang gliding and loved flying just about anything, so it really interested him. I know he did a little more digging over the following weeks to see if there were any other reports, hot air balloons, events, or anything else that might explain it, but he found nothing. To this day, I can still see a perfect picture of that thing in my head, and I still wish I had some kind of explanation as to what we all saw that morning. I've lived in northern Arizona my entire life. A few years ago, I bought a house and a little bit of land just outside of Winslow. My place is small and kind of tucked away off the old Route 66 and only a few miles from town. You probably wouldn't even notice it unless you were looking for it. It's an older ranch-style home on a few acres that I've been fixing up and updating when I can. Most nights it's quiet out here, except the occasional thunderstorm or pack of coyotes. It's a really peaceful place and I love it. About 2 years ago, I was getting ready for bed. It was probably around 11 o'clock because I remember shutting off the TV and I had just finished folding laundry. I went to shut the windows and lock the front door and noticed a light coming from the side of the hill down the street that our main neighborhood road goes around. It wasn't bright like headlights or even like a spotlight. It was pale and like a soft glowing blue. It reminded me of the light you see in a swimming pool at night. At first, I thought it was a helicopter or maybe medevac from the hospital flying low, but I couldn't hear any sound at all, even with the windows wide open, and honestly, it didn't look normal. It was so quiet, actually, that it made me walk outside onto my porch to try and hear something. When I got outside, I could see the hill better and realized there wasn't just one light, there were 3 of them. They were moving in a slow triangle shape along the side of the hill. They were kind of far off at first, but I could tell they were moving in my direction. Still no sound at all, just that glow coming from the thing and lighting up the side of the hill. I just stood there watching and even talking to myself about what this thing could be, and at this point I could tell it was for sure getting closer. I started to realize this definitely wasn't a helicopter or a plane. These lights were in a perfect formation, flying together like they were connected. I could feel my heart rate going up now, and part of me wanted to go back in the house, but I couldn't move. I've never been one to believe in weird stories or sightings at all, but I could not come up with an explanation for what I was seeing. Then, and this startled me, there was another light that came straight down to the ground like a large spotlight, and it was hitting the bottom of the hill. It wasn't actually like a spotlight though, because it was thick. I could see it actually lighting up the dirt and bushes a few hundred yards from my neighbor's driveway up the street. It lit up for just a few seconds, then shut off. Before I could even wrap my head around that, it was on again. This time it was closer, maybe 200 yards from my property, right by this old fence line that runs down our road. Again, it just turned off after a few seconds, and at this point I'm feeling extremely uneasy about the whole situation. I honestly don't know what came over me because I'm usually very calm and level-headed in stressful situations, but I ran back in the house and slammed the door. I locked it and just stood there in the dark, literally feeling my heart pounding in my ears. I've never felt that kind of fear before. This rush of feelings hit me of being alone out there. I didn't have anyone to yell to or talk to or anything. I didn't like it and I didn't know what to do. I'd say 3 or 4 minutes went by before I did anything at all. I truly felt like I shouldn't even be moving around in my house. I finally got the courage to look outside again, and I couldn't see a thing. My windows were still wide open, and I could hear the crickets outside, but it was just dark in every direction. No lights, no neighbors out, nothing. For a few minutes, I wondered if I was losing my mind because it was all just so surreal. I kept asking myself, did that actually just happen? I was awake the rest of the night, calling a few friends, calling my mom who lives just 20 minutes away, sitting on the edge of my bed and carefully staring out the windows every few minutes. I did call into the non-emergency line to tell them what had happened and to make a report, but the lady I talked to said she hadn't gotten any other calls about it. She brought up neighbors flying drones could be what I was seeing. I've seen drones and they definitely make noise. I can't imagine how a drone could have a light on it powerful enough to light up the hill and the ground like that either. None of it made any sense at all. If I hadn't been so scared to go out to my car, I would have gone into town and gotten a hotel room for the night. The next morning, I had calmed down a little and walked down my driveway and out to my road, half expecting to find burn marks or something where those beams of light were, but there was nothing. I ran into my next-door neighbor Bruce a day later and told him what I'd seen. He's been living out here about 20 years longer than I have, and we always chat when we see each other. He's definitely a down-to-earth, blue-collar, old-school guy, and usually brings up politics. But when I told him, he didn't laugh or dismiss my story, and he didn't even look surprised. The only thing he said is that it wasn't the first time he'd heard about something like that. I asked him what he meant, but he just kind of shrugged his shoulders and told me that people see things out here. That didn't exactly make me feel better about the whole thing. It's been 2 years and I haven't seen anything since that night. But every time I'm going to bed and locking the door where I can see out my windows, I can't help but look up my road toward that hill. We lived in Sitka, Alaska from 2002 to 2007, 5 years in what felt like the middle of nowhere, but just outside of town. My husband Matt is a contractor and does a lot of framing, roofing, and small construction jobs. His work allows us to move around a bit, so when he mentioned Alaska, we thought, why not? We both grew up around Boulder, Colorado, and always loved the outdoors, so we figured it'd be an adventure. Plus, we wanted our son, Liam, to grow up surrounded by nature, so we packed everything up and moved into a true cabin in the woods. The cabin was small, cozy, and simple. Nothing like the houses we were used to in Colorado. It had a wood stove that kept the place more than warm, especially during the long Alaskan winters. We had a couple acres of land, mostly trees, and we were always working on projects to make the place feel more like home. One of those projects was a greenhouse just off the back of the house. We didn't have a ton of space in the back, but I loved the idea of growing our own food, even if the weather made it a challenge. Matt stayed busy with jobs around Sitka, and I took care of the house and Liam, along with our chocolate lab, Bear. Bear was a big, goofy sweetheart of a dog, always following me around when I was outside. He had this way of making the woods feel less lonely. He wasn't much of a guard dog, but he was good company. The weird stuff, or what I now call the Sitka lights, started happening in the summer of 2006. I was out back in the evening working on the greenhouse, getting things up on the vegetable side of our greenhouse. It was later, probably around 9:30 at night. The sun doesn't really set until later in the summer, and I was kind of racing to get things done before I completely ran out of light. I was putting up some shelving when I noticed these small lights at the edge of our woods, right at our property line. At first, I thought it was a reflection or maybe headlights from someone coming up our driveway, but when I stepped out of the greenhouse, it wasn't either of those. They were very small, round little lights, just kind of floating around. They'd move in and out of the trees, but didn't come out past them. They were stopping right around where our property started. I stared at them for a while, trying to figure out what I was seeing, and I definitely thought fireflies, but not in Alaska. I honestly had no idea what I was looking at. I'm guessing the whole thing lasted 15 minutes, and then they were gone. I didn't say anything to Matt that night. He was tired from work, and honestly, I wasn't sure what I'd seen was even a big deal. But the next night it happened again. I was outside around the same time, and there they were, floating near the tree line again. They weren't bright at all, more like dim, glowing balls that would fade in and out. I tried to act like I didn't notice them, but it felt like they were aware of me, as weird as that sounds. It was strange, but not scary in any way. If anything, I almost felt like I was being watched, but in a calm, curious way, if that makes any sense. Bear noticed them too, which is when I knew I wasn't the only one seeing these things. He was lying near the greenhouse and I saw him lift his head and stare at the lights. He didn't bark, which was unusual. Bear barked at everything. Deer, squirrels, the wind. But with the lights, he just sat there and watched. I don't think he knew what to make of them either. Again, I'd say 15 minutes later, and they were gone. This went on for about a week. Every night, right around the same time, I'd see the lights. One night I tried to take pictures of them, but the only camera I had was my old Motorola Razr phone, and it couldn't pick up anything in that low light. They never came close to the cabin and always stayed at the edge of the woods. They'd just float there, fading in and out of view, while I'd almost be pretending to work while I watched them. I started to feel like they were almost waiting for me, like they knew I'd be out and they'd come just to watch. Eventually I told Matt, but he didn't really know what to say. He's very practical, logical, and somewhat stoic about a lot of things. His guess was that it was probably something natural, like an Alaskan insect we didn't know about. Still, he didn't argue with me and mostly just shrugged it off. And then, as suddenly as they'd appeared, the lights stopped. One night I went out to work in the greenhouse and there was nothing. I waited for them to show up, but it got dark and I didn't see a thing. I kept looking for them over the next few nights, but they never came back. I was almost sad about it and wondered if I should walk up into the trees to see if they'd come back. We stayed in Sitka for another year, but I never saw the lights again. By 2007, we had decided to come back to Colorado. As much as we loved Alaska, we missed being close to our families and friends. We needed to be around people again, especially for Liam's sake. But even after we moved back, I never stopped thinking about those lights. About a year after we left Alaska, I sent a letter to the new owners of our old cabin. I asked if they'd ever seen the lights or anything strange in the back where the greenhouse was, but I never heard anything back from them. I don't know what I was expecting, but part of me hoped they'd seen them too. It's been years now, but I still think about those lights. Even here in Colorado, I'll catch myself staring out at the trees in the evening, half expecting to see those little glowing orbs. I know it sounds strange, but they really stuck in my mind. I still wonder what they were and why they were there, and why they never came back.